What would you do if the woman who brought your dying child back to life was now slipping away herself? And this time, no amount of money, doctors, or prayers could guarantee a miracle. As secrets unfold and time runs out, one father must decide how far he's willing to go to save the heart of his home. Stay with us, because this story will break you before it heals you. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Rowan Hale sat alone in his silent home, the large windows showing a world outside that didn't match the stillness inside. The halls, once full of his son's laughter, now echoed only with the quiet hum of machines. Micah, his 9-year-old boy, lay upstairs in a bed surrounded by wires, monitors, and the soft beeping that reminded Rowan of how fragile life had become. Years ago, Rowan had built this house for his small family. He had pictured it full of life. Birthday parties, bedtime stories, quiet hugs before school. But everything changed when Micah fell ill. A rare condition, the doctors said, one they didn't fully understand. It had stolen Micah's energy, his words, even his smile. Every treatment had failed. Every promise had broken. And now, all Rowan had was silence. He was a man of great success, known for designing beautiful buildings all over the world. But here, in his own home, nothing made sense anymore. Wealth could build towers, but it couldn't fix his son. It couldn't bring back the sound of footsteps running down the stairs or the giggle that once echoed in the kitchen. Rowan walked up the stairs slowly. He paused outside Micah's room, hand resting on the doorframe. Inside, he saw his son lying, still his small face pale, eyes half closed. A nurse sat nearby, checking a chart quietly. She looked up as Rowan entered. "He had a quiet night," she said softly. Rowan nodded. "Thank you." They didn't say much more. Words felt too heavy these days. After the nurse left, Rowan sat by Micah's bed. He watched his son's chest rise and fall. He wanted to speak, to tell him stories like before, but nothing came out. His throat tightened with guilt. He had spent so many years chasing work, flying to meetings, building dreams. And somewhere along the way, he had forgotten to hold on to the most important one, being a father. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower in the sky. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dalen, came in with a tray of soup. "You need to eat, sir," she said kindly, placing the tray down. Rowan shook his head. "Not hungry." She sat beside him, her old hands folded in her lap. "Micah needs more than machines and nurses," she said. "He needs someone who's with him all the time, someone who brings light." Rowan didn't answer right away. He stared at Micah, whose fingers twitched slightly in his sleep. "I've tried everything," Rowan whispered. Mrs. Dalen touched his arm gently. "Try something different then. Find someone who brings comfort. Not a nurse, not a doctor. Someone who stays." That night, Rowan stood in the middle of his kitchen staring at nothing. Her words echoed in his mind. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. "I need someone for Micah," he said. "Someone to stay here, not a professional, just someone who truly cares. I don't care about qualifications, just find someone with a kind heart." The next morning, the search began. People came and went. Some wore perfect uniforms, spoke with perfect words, and showed perfect documents. But none of them felt right. They all looked at Micah as a patient. Rowan wanted someone who would see him as a boy. 3 days later, a woman walked into his office without much to show. Her clothes were plain, her hands rough from work, and her eyes tired but warm. Her name was Marin Lark. Rowan looked up from his desk. "You don't have a resume?" Marin shook her head. "No, I've never worked in a hospital. But I cared for my little sister for 6 years. She couldn't move or speak. But she laughed when I told her stories. She held my hand when I sat beside her. I know how to love someone who's hurting." Rowan leaned back in his chair. He studied her. She didn't speak with practiced charm. She spoke with truth. "Why do you want to live here and do this?" he asked. Marin looked down for a moment. Then she said, "My sister passed away last year. Since then, I've felt lost. I don't have much, but I have time. And I have care. I want to give that to someone again. Rowan was quiet. Her words had struck something deep inside him. Maren wasn't offering a service. She was offering something more rare. Presence. You can move in tomorrow, he said simply. My assistant will tell you the rest. Maren's eyes widened. Thank you. I'll do my best. The next day, Maren arrived at the Hale home with only one small suitcase. Mrs. Dalen greeted her at the door and led her through the tall hallways to Micah's room. Maren paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. The quiet hum of machines, the pale boy, the soft light. She walked to Micah slowly and knelt beside the bed. Hi, Micah, she whispered. I'm Maren. I'm here to be with you. I'll talk to you, read to you, and sit with you even if you can't talk back. She took his hand in hers. It was cool, fragile, and yet she held it gently, like something precious. As she began, reading from a storybook she'd brought, her voice filled the room, not loud but warm, steady, real. For the first time in a long time, the house felt different. Something small had shifted. Maren stayed beside Micah that night, humming softly as the machines ticked around her. And somewhere, in the stillness, a quiet ache began to fade. The days passed slowly at the Hale house, but they were no longer empty. Something had changed since Maren arrived. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, like a soft breeze that gently moved through the rooms, bringing warmth where cold had settled in. Rowan noticed it first in the air. The house didn't feel as heavy anymore. Maren didn't speak much to him, but he could hear her voice from Micah's room every morning. Soft, steady, and full of care. She read to Micah from storybooks, told him small tales from her childhood, and sometimes just sat with him in silence, holding his hand. And somehow, that silence didn't feel lonely anymore. Micah's room, once a place filled with machines and worry, now felt different. Flowers sat on the windowsill. Maren brought them from the garden outside, saying they should have something alive near them. Colorful paper drawings started to appear on the walls, things she had made with Micah's hands, even if they barely moved. Sometimes she would guide his fingers just to show him he still mattered. One evening, Rowan stood outside Micah's door. He didn't go in. He simply listened. Maren's voice floated out, soft and full of emotion. You're stronger than the clouds, Micah, she was saying. They pass by. But you're still here. And every day you stay, you give the sky another reason to shine. Rowan closed his eyes. Something inside him stirred. It wasn't guilt this time. It was hope. Tiny, but real. Later that night, over a quiet dinner, Maren joined Rowan at the table. It was the first time she'd sat there since moving in. Mrs. Dalen had prepared stew and bread, and the fire crackled in the background. Thank you for everything you're doing, Rowan said after a long silence. Maren smiled softly. He's a brave boy. I'm just here to remind him he's not alone. Rowan looked at her closely. Her hands were rough, but they held the gentleness of someone who had known deep pain. Her eyes held something he hadn't seen in a long time. Patience, without expectations. You've done more in 2 weeks than any doctor has done in months, he said. Maren shook her head. I'm not a healer. I'm just someone who stays. Rowan didn't reply. But that night he sat by Micah's bed after Maren had gone to sleep. He picked up the book Maren had been reading and tried reading aloud. His voice was unsure at first, cracking over the words. But Micah's fingers moved just a little, and that was enough. The next morning, Maren found Rowan asleep in the chair beside Micah, the book still in his hand. As the days grew longer, so did Micah's moments of awareness. He started blinking in response to voices. Once, when Maren was reading a funny story, a tiny smile appeared on his lips. Maren rushed to get Rowan, and for the first time in over a year, father and son shared a moment that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. But with every small joy came quiet worry. Maren had begun to tire easily. She brushed it off when asked, saying she just needed rest. But Mrs. Dalen had seen the way Maren leaned against the walls when she thought no one was watching. She had seen her pale face after reading for too long. Something wasn't right. Rowan noticed it too. Marin's hands shook when she poured tea. Her steps were slower. He asked if she was okay. Marin only smiled, saying, "Just a little worn out. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. One afternoon, while Marin and Micah were working on a small art project, she suddenly went quiet. She dropped the paintbrush. Micah looked at her with wide eyes. Marin reached for the table to steady herself, but she collapsed. Before she could speak, Rowan heard the noise and rushed in. He found Marin on the floor, unconscious. Panic filled his chest. He called for help, his voice breaking with fear. An ambulance arrived quickly. Micah's eyes followed her stretcher as it rolled away. He didn't speak, but the fear in his gaze said everything. At the hospital, Rowan sat beside Marin's bed. She looked smaller now, her skin pale, her breath shallow. The doctor came in with quiet steps. "She's been hiding symptoms," the doctor said. "She has an autoimmune disorder. Her body's been fighting itself. Stress and lack of rest made it worse." Rowan felt like the air had been pulled from his lungs. "Will she be okay?" he asked. "It depends on treatment and time," the doctor replied. "But she's strong." Rowan looked at Marin, her face peaceful even in weakness. She had given everything she had to help Micah, and now she was the one who needed care. He reached for her hand and held it tightly. "You stayed for us," he whispered. "Now we'll stay for you." Marin woke slowly, her eyes blinking against the soft hospital light. Her body felt heavy, like it had been carrying too much for too long. She turned her head slightly and saw Rowan sitting in the chair beside her, his head resting in his hands. He looked older than before, tired, worn, but present. He looked up when he felt her move. "You're awake," he whispered, relief filling his voice. Marin tried to smile. "Barely," she said softly. He reached for her hand and held it gently. It was cold, thinner than he remembered. They sat in silence for a moment, the steady beeping of machines the only sound between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. Marin looked away, her eyes growing wet. "Because I didn't want to be another problem you had to solve. You already had enough with Micah." Rowan shook his head. "You were never a problem. You've been the answer." Marin closed her eyes. "The truth is, I've been sick for a while. I found out before I came to your house, but I needed something to hold on to, something to live for." "So you came to us?" Rowan asked. She nodded. "I thought, maybe if I could help Micah, maybe I'd matter again." Rowan's voice cracked as he spoke. "You do matter. More than you know." Tears slipped down Marin's cheeks. They weren't just from sadness. They were from the weight of hiding, of pretending to be strong when she was slowly breaking inside. Back at the Hale house, Micah lay in bed staring at the window. He hadn't spoken a word since Marin left. Mrs. Dalen tried to cheer him up with music and books, but nothing worked. The sparkle that had begun to return to his eyes was gone again. Rowan returned from the hospital that night. He sat by Micah and held his small hand. "She's going to fight, buddy," he said. "Just like you." Micah blinked once, his gaze distant. But then, slowly, his fingers moved and gripped Rowan's hand tighter than before. "We'll fight together," Rowan whispered. In the hospital, Marin began treatment. The doctors were hopeful but honest. It would be a long road. She needed rest, medicine, and most of all, support. Rowan made a promise that day. He would not let her go through this alone. He cut back his work hours, moved meetings, and even brought some of Micah's things to Marin's hospital room so she could feel closer to him. Marin's room became a quiet place of hope. Drawings from Micah filled the walls. Messages like "Keep fighting" and "We believe in you" were written in crayon. Every morning, Rowan would sit by her side and read a chapter from her favorite books. Sometimes he brought stories Micah wanted her to hear. Days turned into weeks. Marin's strength began to return little by little. Her cheeks held more color. Her voice grew stronger. And one day, she asked for something that surprised Rowan. "I want to see him," she said. "I miss Micah." Rowan nodded. "He misses you too." That weekend, he arranged for Micah to visit. The hospital allowed it under special permission. Maren waited nervously, brushing her hair and fixing her blanket over her lap. When Micah entered the room, he looked smaller than Maren remembered, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw her. "Hi, Micah," she whispered. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. He reached out and touched her hand. Then, something remarkable happened. "Don't go," Micah said. His voice was soft, raspy but clear. Maren's eyes widened. She looked up at Rowan, who was frozen in place. Micah had spoken. For the first time in months, tears filled her eyes as she reached for him. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "Not if I can help it." Rowan knelt beside them, his hands trembling. "You brought him back," he said to Maren, "and now we'll bring you back too." After that day, everything shifted again. Micah's speech became clearer. He began asking for Maren's stories again. And Maren, still healing, returned home with a nurse by her side. She wasn't as strong as before, but she was smiling again. The light she had given to others had started returning to her. One night, as the three of them sat in the living room, Maren wrapped in a blanket. Micah nestled between them. Rowan spoke from his heart. "You saved us," he said. "Both of us." Maren shook her head. "We saved each other." There was no need for more words. In the quiet glow of the room, the threads of love, hope, and healing had woven something unbreakable between them. But life wasn't done testing them yet, and none of them knew that one more challenge was waiting just around the corner. The sky outside was pale with early morning light as Maren sat by the window of Micah's room. A soft blanket draped around her shoulders. The chill in the air didn't bother her. She watched the trees sway gently and listened to the quiet sound of birds. It was peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Rowan entered the room quietly, holding 2 cups of warm tea. He placed one beside Maren and sat across from her. Micah was still asleep, curled under his favorite blanket, his hand clutching a small stuffed bear. "He had a good night," Maren said softly. He even smiled in his sleep. Rowan nodded, looking at his son. "I think he's been sleeping better because you're here." Maren smiled, but her eyes were tired. "I'm trying to hold on." He noticed the way she said it, not with fear, but with effort, like someone walking a tightrope. Days had passed since her return from the hospital. Maren was recovering slowly, but not without struggle. There were moments when her strength failed her. There were nights when her breathing was shallow and her energy faded fast. And even though she didn't always say it, Rowan could see the fear hiding behind her quiet words. One evening, Maren collapsed again. It happened without warning. One moment she was laughing with Micah over a drawing he made, and the next, she was gripping the side of the table, her face pale, her knees shaking. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground. The hospital was ready for them this time. Doctors worked fast, but the situation was worse than before. Maren's condition had suddenly turned severe. Her body was no longer responding to the treatment the way they hoped. Her breathing was shallow, her heartbeat weak. Rowan sat beside her hospital bed through the night, holding her hand tightly, refusing to let go. His heart beat loudly in his ears, drowning out every other sound. "Don't leave me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Don't leave us. We need you. Micah needs you. I need you." Hours passed. Her body stayed still. Her chest rose slowly like it was struggling to hold on. And then, her fingers twitched. Her eyes fluttered open. Her lips moved slightly. "I'm here," she whispered hoarsely. "I'm still here." Relief hit Rowan like a wave. He closed his eyes and held her hand against his chest. Maren was not out of danger, but she had survived the worst night of her life. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Maren was tired, but stronger. The color returned to her cheeks. Her eyes held a light that hadn't been there for weeks. Micah visited often, bringing her flowers from the garden and reading stories in the same soft voice Maren had once used, for him. The roles had shifted, but the love between them remained the same. And then, one quiet afternoon, something unexpected happened. Rowan stood in Marin's hospital room, watching her laugh at something Micah had said. The moment was simple, but powerful. Marin's smile lit up the room. Her hand rested gently on Micah's back and Micah leaned into her without fear. It was a picture of peace, of family, of something more than survival. Rowan stepped closer. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice calm but full of emotion. Marin looked up at him, her expression gentle. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring, simple, beautiful, and full of meaning. "Marin, you saved my son," he said. "You saved me. You walked into our lives when we were broken and gave us light. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I want you in it." Her eyes filled with tears as he continued. "Will you marry me? Will you be the mother Micah already sees in you? And the partner I never knew I needed?" Marin's hand covered her mouth as the tears fell freely. She nodded slowly, her voice shaking. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Micah clapped his hands, a wide smile on his face. It was the happiest Rowan had seen him since before the illness. A few weeks later, under the spring sun in the garden of the Hale home, Marin and Rowan were married in a small, quiet ceremony. Micah stood between them, holding both their hands. There were no grand speeches, just a few simple words spoken with love and honesty. "I choose to stay," Marin said. "And I choose you," Rowan replied. The ceremony ended with soft laughter and a few happy tears. As the wind danced through the flowers, the three of them stood together, no longer a man, a woman, and a boy, but a family. Life still held its challenges. Marin's health was fragile. Micah's journey was not over. But together they had found something stronger than pain, stronger than fear. They had chosen love, and sometimes that's all it takes.